alive and he's living on the inside, roaring like a lion, like God is not dead. He's surely alive and he's living on the inside, roaring like a lion, like God is not dead. He's surely alive and he's living.
There was a young boy who'd been gone on to bed. His dad had put him in bed, and about 5 minutes after he went to bed, his dad heard the voice, "Dad, what? I'm thirsty. Can you bring me some water?" "No, you had your chance. Lights out." About 5 minutes later, "Dad, what? I'm thirsty. Can I have a drink of water?" "I told you no. If you ask again, I'm going to have to give you a spanking." 5 minutes later, "Dad, what? When you come in to spank me, can you bring me a drink of water?" I say, have you ever been thirsty? I don't mean just, oh, I feel a little dry. I think I will wet my whistle. I mean the kind of real thirsty where your tongue sticks to the roof of your mouth, where you have to pull your lips off of your teeth because their mouth is so dry. And all that you can think about is water. This is the kind of thirst that Jesus Christ had upon the cross, but very much worse. Turn in your scripture text, if you will, to John chapter 19, verse 28. John 19:28, it says, "Later, knowing that everything had now been finished, and so that Scripture could be fulfilled, Jesus said, 'I am thirsty.' A jar of wine vinegar was there, so they soaked a sponge in it, put the sponge on a stalk of the hyssop plant, and lifted it to Jesus' lips." Jesus Christ died on the cross. This is no new revelation to, I think, all of you. But what we need to fully understand is that when Jesus died on the cross, yes, he was the Son of God. Yes, he came from divinity. But Jesus on the cross was fully human. He was fully human. Now, God sent him to the earth. This meant that Jesus was incarnate. He was incarnate. In John chapter 1, verse 14, it states, "The Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us, and we have seen his glory, the glory of the one and only Son, whom came from the Father, full of grace and truth." The Word, Jesus Christ, became flesh. He was transformed into flesh. Scientist J. Robert Oppenheimer once said the best way to send an idea is to wrap it up in a person. The theological word for all of that is incarnation, meaning in the flesh. Jesus was the incarnation of God. Jesus was the way that God sent his idea to humanity. There was and is no better way. Like the little girl who said, "Some people couldn't bear God's inside whisper." And so he sent Jesus to tell them out loud. Jesus was God incarnate. He was also flesh. Flesh. Hebrews chapter 2, verse 17 says, "For this reason he had to be made like them, fully human in every way, in order that he might become merciful and faithful high priest in service to God, and that he might make atonement for the sins of the people." In the time of Jesus, and in some cases now, there was a teaching that Jesus was not actually physical. He was not actually in the flesh, that he was more of a spiritual being. They didn't actually suffer. They didn't actually die. But Jesus was born. Jesus was born. Now let me ask you something. If you think about childbirth, not as a parent, but as the child, how many of you would ever want to go through childbirth again? I think we have a unanimous understanding here. But Jesus came from his throne above and became an infant, became a small child, became a baby, grew in his mother's womb, was given birth to by his mother, Mary. He was born, and he grew just like the kids that you see around you are growing up. So Jesus grew from boyhood into manhood. And he thirsted when he was thirsty. And when his belly ached, he was hungry. And when things got sad, he got emotional. And when something struck him as funny, he laughed. And he got tired. Jesus was flesh. We need to also understand the perimeters around that word, the perimeters around those simple words that he spoke, I am thirsty, was that Jesus, on the cross, Jesus was tortured. He was tortured. Now, there were a lot of ways that somebody could put you to death back then. The Jewish people liked to take rocks and throw them at you. But they would throw them intentionally at your legs and at your arms and at your abdomen because they didn't want to kill you right away. Eventually, a rock would find the mark and crack your skull and kill you, or you die of internal hemorrhaging. There were other ways that people were put to death. But Roman crucifixion was the cruelest form of death. A person actually had large nail spikes driven through their hands and through their feet. You know, until not just a few decades, they didn't actually have any proof of crucifixions. They were written about, but there had been no archaeological evidence until they found some skeletal remains. And they found a spike driven through a man's foot. Now, when we think of Jesus and we think of nails going through his hands, well, it must have gone through his finger bones, or it must have gone through that gap in his bones and his wrist. But when it came to nailing his feet to the cross, they took a hammer and a nail and drove it. They pinned him down, tied him down till he could not move a fraction, and drove it through his feet, through the very bone itself. They could not take a chance that somehow the foot might tear off the spike. It had to go through the bone. Jesus was tortured. When a person was crucified, hanging just from the nails, with no way to rest, when their arms got tired, they'd push up on their feet, on the spike in their feet. And when that could no longer could bear the pain, then they would relax on the nails in their hands. It was a catch-22. There was no relief anywhere on the cross. Jesus was tortured. Crucifixion was designed to cause the maximum amount of suffering without immediately killing a person. If a person died from crucifixion too soon, the executioner was punished because of it. It was not unusual for the crucified to last for days on the cross if it was done properly. And Jesus endured the cross willingly. He endured the cross willingly. He says in John chapter 10, verses 17 and 18, he says, "The reason my Father loves me is that I lay down my life, only to take it up again. No one takes it from me, but I lay it down of my own accord. I have authority to lay it down and authority to take it up again. This command I received from my Father." Now let me tell you something. Jesus was not some sort of glutton for pain. He experienced pain just like you and I. And as he knew, prophesied, envisioned himself on that cross and the beatings and the floggings and the crucifixion for hours, who in their right mind would look forward to such a thing? In fact, in the Garden of Gethsemane, Jesus could have. He sat there for hours praying to God. If there's any other way, let this cup pass from me. But he submitted to the Father's will. He submitted to God's will. He could have, at any time, ran out of that garden. And when the soldiers showed up, and Judas showed up, and decided to arrest him, and Peter drew out his sword and started hacking away, he could have said, "Good work, Peter. Keep them busy." But he didn't. He willingly submitted himself in that garden. He could have freed himself at any time. He could have called down on the cross, called down a host of angels who could have struck everybody dead and just gone on back to heaven. But he didn't. He could have said, "They're just not worth it." But he didn't. Instead, he said, "Father, forgive them. Father, forgive them." On the cross, Jesus went the distance. Philippians chapter 2, verse 8. It says, "Being found in appearance as a man, he humbled himself by becoming obedient to the point of death, even on a cross." He became obedient not only to die, but to die in the worst possible way on the cross. Jesus chose no shortcuts. I don't want this to sound wrong, okay? Bear with me as I explain this. He purposely did the right things to provoke the beatings and the floggings. Not that he did anything wrong, but he avoided doing anything that would get him off the hook. He just remained quiet